Good afternoon. Responsible governance is a core pillar of the Republican commitment to America. Today, the Rules Committee will continue to deliver on that promise by ensuring fiscal responsibility and addressing executive agency abuses with three measures. The first I'll discuss is essential to upholding both the constitutional and sacred obligations of Congress. H.R. 4366, the Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and Related Agencies Appropriation Act for fiscal year 2024 will fulfill our Article I responsibilities and honor the service of America's heroes, our veterans. This appropriations bill provides robust funding for critical health care benefits and service programs for the brave men and women who selflessly served our nation. It invests in the well-being of veterans, VA medical centers, and our national security. I want to reiterate that this legislation fully funds health care for our nation's veterans, ensuring those who fought for our freedom get the care that they need and deserve. It also provides nearly $1 billion in funding for military construction above the President's budget request, with a focus on investments in military housing and other quality of life projects to provide support for military families. By prioritizing spending to focus on these priorities, not radical left-wing schemes like critical race theory and contentious diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, we're targeting resources to make the greatest impact for those who've worn the uniform. Targeted investments are crucial to our constrained fiscal environment. As a member of this committee and an appropriator, our mounting debts and deficits are of great alarm. It's a concern that has only grown as the Biden administration has pushed an agenda of wild and out-of-control spending. Democrat-led partisan spending bills have resulted in our nation racking up multi-trillion-dollar deficits in both 2021 and 2022. Those numbers might be hard for most to conceptualize, but the results are not. Every American has felt the impact of the worst inflationary crisis in 40 years and a federal debt that continues to spiral out of control. Hardworking middle-class Americans are paying the price for this irresponsible spending spree. It's exactly why the bill before us eliminates wasteful spending without sacrificing the needs of our veterans and military. With H.R. 4366, are both delivering for our heroes and charting a responsible fiscal path forward. I expect robust debate on this bill in today's hearing and look forward to a strong amendment process. Our two additional items today are joint resolutions arising under the Congressional Review Act that address the concerns of the Biden administration's overreach under the Endangered Species Act that is hurting American farmers, ranchers, and other landowners. These measures previously passed the Senate and only need to pass the House to go to the President's desk. Specifically, the Senate Joint Resolution 9 disapproves of a rule listing two population segments of the lesser prairie chicken as endangered and threatened, and Senate Joint Resolution 24 disapproves of a rule uplisting the northern long-eared bat as endangered. The listing of the lesser prairie chicken has had serious impacts on my own home state of Oklahoma, while the listing of the northern long-eared bat impacts 37 states where the species may theoretically be found. As with the Waters of the United States rule, the common theme of much of the Biden administration's environmental regulations is expansion. At every turn, the administration seeks to expand the scope of environmental laws and to give in to environmental activists. The end result is to force private landowners to shoulder heavier burdens and to tie up development projects with more red tape. Even in circumstances where there are successful voluntary conservation efforts being managed at the state and local level, as is the case with both the lesser prairie chicken and the northern long-eared bat. These efforts are not enough for the Biden White House. Rather than improving heavy-handed, one-size-fits-all requirements from Washington, we would be better served to allow successful conservation efforts to continue. Passage of these two resolutions will do just that. I now yield to my good friend, our distinguished ranking member, Mr. McGovern, for any remarks he wishes to make.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're meeting today on three measures, one appropriations bill, and two disapproval resolutions regarding the status of endangered species. I guess this is what House Republicans are most concerned with, whether or not the lesser prairie chicken and the northern long-eared bat should be protected as endangered species. Don't get me wrong, I believe we should be protecting these animals, not reversing their endangered status. But we are 2 months away from the end of the fiscal year and a possible government shutdown, and we are talking about the lesser prairie chicken and the northern long-eared bat. I mean, really? Not only is there a problem of priorities here, Mr. Chairman, but I also have to say we had a deal. Democrats and Republicans had a deal, and now Republicans are backtracking. In May, we almost defaulted on the debt because the House Freedom Caucus threw a temper tantrum about paying our bills. And while they were out here acting like children, President Biden and Speaker McCarthy struck a bipartisan agreement to avoid default. Part of that agreement was to set non-defense spending levels roughly flat for the next 2 fiscal years. That was what was agreed to. That was the deal. And that's not what we're seeing here. The appropriation bills for FY24 that we are seeing come out of committees are all well below what was agreed to with the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So I guess my question is, how are we supposed to negotiate in good faith with Republicans moving forward when Republicans are not able to hold up their end of the bargain? H.R. 4366 is the first and only appropriations bill to be brought before the Rules Committee this year. And frankly, it's a complete partisan mess. It has extreme policy riders that have turned what could have been a good bipartisan bill into yet another MAGA wish list. Less money for military family housing, failing to address the VA infrastructure backlog, shortchanging PFAS remediation and cleanup, eliminated dedicated climate and military-based resiliency efforts, and this one is just crazy because Republicans now think it's woke to protect our military bases from the extreme weather caused by climate change. And of course, more MAGA culture wars, more attempts to ban abortion nationwide, deny care for LGBTQ plus veterans, and gut programs that try to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in the military. Mr. Chairman, as an appropriator, you know this bill will be a non-starter if it passes the House. And honestly, there is a legitimate question here on whether this bill even passes the House at all. Just this morning, the House Freedom Caucus members were outside ranting and raving once again. They held a press conference where the most right wing of the right wing were promising to vote down any rule, any funding bill that is not exactly what they want, in the way they want it, how they want it, and when they want it. And, you know, what do they want? I don't even think they know what they want. Up until now, all we've heard is how omnibuses and minibuses that package spending bills together are not the appropriate way to do things. I've heard that over and over and over from my friends on the other side of the aisle. Now we're hearing that the Freedom Caucus is more than okay with packaging the bills up and possibly even doing a continuing resolution to keep the lights on until the Republican conference can get its act together. Democrats were criticized last year by Republicans when we entered the August work period, having passed 6 out of the 12 funding bills. Republicans kept on saying we should have passed them all. Well, this is the first appropriations bill Republicans managed to get to our committee. And we're about to recess on Friday. We have another one slated for consideration tomorrow, but even if everything goes perfectly over the next few days, which I don't know that it will, we're going to make 2 bills that my friends are going to deliver before the August recess. If we did a horrible job passing half of the appropriations bills by this point last year, as my friends pointed out over and over, what should we think about of only passing 1 or maybe even 2? At this rate, we're on track for a government shutdown. And you know what one of our Republican colleagues said this morning? And I quote, "We don't fear a government shutdown. Most of what we do up here is bad anyway." That was Congressman Bob Good who said that. I can't believe I have to say this, but we should, in fact, fear a government shutdown. A government shutdown is a very bad thing that hurts our constituents. I know the last time our government shut down was a while ago, the longest in history because the previous Republican majority and Trump couldn't get their act together. But it seems important to remind everybody what a government shutdown means. In addition to demonstrating the dysfunction of Congress, it means anybody who requires assistance with their benefits won't get the help that they need. Applicants for Social Security and Medicare get turned away. Environmental and food inspections slow to a crawl. Air travel becomes more dangerous as many TSA agents and air traffic controllers get furloughed. It hurts our seniors. It hurts our veterans. It hurts people back at home. And the last shutdown cost our economy billions of dollars. But that's what we're facing if Republicans don't start taking this process seriously and get these bills done in a way that can earn the president's signature. We will have a shutdown, and it will be entirely thanks to the MAGA fringe who want our government to fail, who want to see the government go up in flames. That's their idea of success, because most of what we do up here, according to Republicans, is bad anyways. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I'd like to welcome our first panel, Chairman John Carter. I advise the committee that Ranking Member Debbie Wasserman Schultz, unfortunately, has had a travel delay and through no fault of her own is not able to be here. We're making arrangements with the minority to have another witness. That witness will be recognized to testify whenever he arrives. Again, last minute thing, we certainly understand the travel difficulties on the first day back. And so with that, I want to, again, welcome my friend, Mr. Carter, from the Committee on Appropriations. Judge Carter, welcome back to the Rules Committee, and I would welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. McGovern, and all the members of this committee. I want to thank each of you for the opportunity to testify for this FY 24 Military Construction and Veterans Affairs bill. And this is a good bill. This bill is a good bill because it supports our troops and their families and the nation's veterans. We provide $800 million above the budget request for military construction and family housing. We focus in this funding to deter congressional aggression in the Pacific and on barracks and child development centers. We fully fund veterans programs as they were requested at the requested level. Excuse my voice. And while strengthening our oversight of the VA. In response to VA's actions, this bill will include the Hyde Amendment. This will ensure tax dollars are not used to fund elective abortions. And now my friend and I, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, when she gets here, she opposes this at probably every level. But quite frankly, we worked together very congeally. Congeally, that's not a word. Anyway, she was very cordial the entire time. I'm glad we're at this step and in the process, and hope that we can continue to work together to support our troops and our veterans. I thank each of you again for this hearing. I'm ready to answer any questions you may have.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Then just to reiterate, when the minority witness arrives, we'll allow them time to make their opening statement.
And by the way, Debbie called me, and I called you folks, staff, and said, I'm ready to accommodate her till she gets here. But your scheduling is your scheduling.
Fair enough. We're all familiar with airline problems. So, Judge, I want to thank you for joining us at the Rules Committee today. As you know, one of Congress's most important obligations is providing for the common defense of the nation. It'd be impossible for our fighting men and women to do that without the funding and resources that they need. I do want to say that one of the common concerns I hear from constituents is I don't know how to put this delicately, but there's been a lot of deferred maintenance on base housing since the 1990s. And my understanding is from past several years from doing this, that there has been a significant amount of catch-up that has occurred. But do you feel the funding necessary for this?
We have got, to answer your question, we've got funding in this bill on that issue. And on top of that, we're on top of the various posts and bases to make sure that they give us a clear picture of what's going on. And so far, they've been very cooperative.
Well, and it's just so important, not just while people are deployed, but while they're stationed here at home. And again, deferred maintenance, as anybody who's owned a home will tell you, it will save money in the short term, but cost you more money in the long term.
I'm deferring maintenance every weekend in my house.
So there's been some discussion in the press that Republicans are forcing veterans to bear the brunt of federal spending cuts. But then in reviewing the legislation, it seems that our veterans' health care programs and veterans' benefits are fully funded. Do you have any thoughts on the disconnect between what is in the bill and how it's being portrayed in the press?
They surprised me with that discussion. We fully funded and more in the healthcare area. So I don't understand where that's coming from.
So we could just refer people to read the bill when they've got questions in that regard.
Well, it's one of my Democrat friends don't tell me it's just politics.
Okay. I have a relatively parochial issue. Chairman Bosto of the Veterans Committee has been helping me with this, but it has been a long struggle. The VA in Denton, the Denton community-based outpatient clinic, needs to be expanded to allow for more mental health services for veterans in our North Texas area. Funding has been provided by the Appropriations Committee for year over year, but the promises made on the ground by the VA have been empty. A contract gets close to being awarded for the construction, but then it gets delayed for 10 months, 12 months. And this has been going on for 8 years. The VA has recognized the problem, but has done nothing for the veterans in my hometown who've not had the proper mental health services that they deserve. So with Congress controlling the power of the purse, what can be done to make certain that the VA does the job that they've actually been instructed to do, both by the authorizing VA committee and by your subcommittee in appropriations?
This bill that we're talking about here funds $16.5 billion for mental health and $42 million for VA's National Center for PTSD. And we will be watching and reviewing that throughout the year.
Well, I will provide.
You got a complaint?
Yeah, I got a lot of complaints.
You know how to find my office. Come see me.
Well, you know, I don't have generally a reputation for being a hothead. There's only one meeting that I've ever walked out of, and that was a meeting with the Dallas VA when they refused to continue funding for an outpatient veterans mental health facility. They said we can take care of it all through telehealth. I had a staff member with me that day who was a veteran who was using those mental health services and said telehealth is not meeting the needs of the veterans in the district. So I will follow up with you. I want to be sure that we have the follow through on this. It's great to have the money appropriated, but somehow there's a disconnect on the ground with actually getting the structure built and getting the veterans the care that they need. So we will be watching, and I do want to work.
I'll be willing to help you, I
Thank you.
promise.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
You know, the Waco facility, that's their number one priority is mental health.
Yes. I'll yield back my time. I'll recognize the ranking member.
Well, thank you, and Mr. Chairman, I'm going to let you save your voice, so I'm not going to. I'll let my more inquisitive colleagues here asked most of the questions. I just would just say, that, it's a shame that, that this bill that came out of your committee with a partisan vote, and it's a shame that it will come to the floor with a very partisan vote. And it's not because of what you tried to do necessarily in terms of military construction, but it's all these extraneous policy riders, which, quite frankly, make it unacceptable for many of us on this side of the aisle who believe that women should decide, for themselves what kind of health care that they deem is necessary, and people on our side who believe that the targeting of the LGBTQ plus community by Republicans is offensive and, quite frankly, bigoted in so many ways. It just makes it impossible. And it's just a shame that it's not only on this bill, but on almost every bill is loaded up with these culture wars that, that quite frankly, make it impossible for there to be bipartisanship. And maybe it is the goal of the Republican leadership here to make sure that as many bills come out of here in a partisan way as possible. But I will tell you, for somebody who's been around here for a long time, the goal is to get a good bill, to get it accepted by the Senate, and to get it to the President for his signature. And so I have great respect for the gentleman. It's just getting a little tiresome. I don't know who's requiring that you have to load this up like a Christmas tree with all these policy riders that are very, very divisive. But on every bill, it's just becoming a little bit tiresome and unfortunate. But again, I don't want to, belabor this point, but I just think it's unfortunate. But I just want the gentleman to know that I have high respect for him, and I wish he could have brought it in without all this other stuff on it. But I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Judge, I had a question. You touched upon it briefly, I think, in your opening statement, but could you expand upon what this bill does for Gitmo?
Well, we maintain Gitmo. We're going to do some repairs on Gitmo, and with the money that was set aside to do more repairs, we're going to do be transferred to stuff on this country shores, which has nothing to do with them, and we're not going to let them come here. And it's a very clear question.
Right.
Who wants to raise their hand? They're terrorists.
Right.
Living in the neighborhood.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I prosecuted terrorists in Iraq, so I was just asking out of personal interest because I know how dangerous they are. But and then I wanted to ask about the South China Sea and what we're doing. So as you know, the CCP is basically building islands in the South China Sea, militarizing the Spratly Islands as well, for example. What does this bill do to counter the nefarious actions of the Chinese in the South China Sea?
Well, I think a lot of you've seen already, we're covering up Guam. Guam is going to be a central part of the fight. And we're almost all of our military, Marines have a Marine base there, Navy, Army, Air Force, they're all going to be there. And maybe even the Coast Guard. But I know those four are. I visited Guam on a short trip, and then I went on to visit that island. What's the name of that island? Kwajalein, which is like paradise, except your cell phone doesn't work there. It is paradise, but there, and then we've got to make a relationship with labor on Guam to get all the money, the projects built, because these both Hawaii, Guam, and Kwajalein all said we got no labor, and so that's a very important issue for us to put together an agreement with the people in the Philippines and a special visa for them. or that money's just gonna sit there. And it's very important it gets done.
Well, thanks, Judge. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate all the hard work you put into the bill. So thanks for testifying, and I yield back.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Thank you. You know, obviously, we have a commitment to support our veterans and service members and their families, and it's unfortunate that the bill before us tonight falls short of that. As the ranking member mentioned, some of our colleagues seem to have lost sight of what should be our overall goal, actually passing the legislation that can do that. I'm pleased to see that the PACT Act's Toxic Exposure Fund is fully funded in this bill, but the bill underfunds military construction and VA infrastructure and contains no dedicated funding for critical efforts like the PFAS cleanup. And as the ranking member mentioned, this bill, like so many that the House majority has sent to the floor recently, is loaded up with right-wing policy riders that actually hurt our veterans. I'm particularly concerned about the attempt to restrict access to reproductive health care for veterans and their family members. The VA has a 2022 interim final rule on reproductive health services that allows veterans and their eligible family members to access reproductive health care, including abortion care, through the VA in cases of rape, incest, and cases of life or health endangerment for the mother. This bill's attempt to overturn that rule is yet another example of anti-abortion lawmakers pushing their agenda to jeopardize access to reproductive care and to ban abortion for everyone on a national level, as opposed to letting women have the freedom to make those decisions with the consultation of their doctors as opposed to politicians. So it threatens the health, safety, well-being, and personal decision-making of the veterans that our colleagues claim to support. I'm also opposed to the continued efforts of our right-wing colleagues to attach policy riders that erase history and bury the continued impact of discrimination on our veterans and armed forces. We saw these efforts in connection with the NDAA and now in the Milk-Cowan Vets bill. When I was home in my district in one of the weekends in between those two bills, I had the honor of participating in a ceremony to award the Congressional Gold Medal to one of our Milford Point veterans. You know, before I was involved in this, I had no idea what a Milford Point veteran was. These were the African-American Marines who joined as a result of Roosevelt's order during World War II, despite the fierce opposition of Marine leadership. They were placed in a segregated camp near Camp Lejeune. They had to contend with wildlife and really poor conditions. So in serving their country to fight World War II, they also were serving their country to desegregate our military. They performed honorably at Iwo Jima, Okinawa. There were 22,000 of them, and they have been basically lost to history until efforts commenced in 2011 and thereafter to identify them and to honor their service with this gold medal by recognizing the fact that they were not paid, they were not honored, they did not receive the medals to which they were entitled. This was so meaningful to their communities and to their families that they finally get the recognition to which they were entitled. And it's still just happening now because the Marine Corps didn't keep records about them, didn't honor them while they were alive. We still have 11 in the VA hospital in Philadelphia. They're getting up there. But to gut these efforts to recognize the longstanding impact of discrimination in our armed forces, particularly at a time when we're having so much difficulty recruiting people to join those armed forces with our all-volunteer armed forces, it's really short-sighted and just, I think it's a huge mistake. So, you know, our veterans fought and sacrificed for our freedoms. As lawmakers, I think we need to ensure that we protect their freedoms, that we honor them, that we protect their freedom to make their own personal health care decisions. So with that, I would yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chairman, did you have any response to that? Did you want to respond to some of
Well,
the
it was a
comments?
whole lot of it I didn't know where she got her information from. And I did know about those Marines because I'm a history major, okay? But You know, you're entitled to your opinion and I'm entitled to mine. But we fully fund all those programs you talked about. So whoever's telling the other way around is leading you down a path. This is not true.
And so, Mr. Chair, can I just clarify? You said that the programs that were just discussed are fully funded in the bill.
Yes, they are all fully funded.
So we are honoring, we are not erasing history, we're
No,
honoring
we're not
those
erasing
folks.
history at all.
All right, and
In fact, we're replacing history in some places.
wonderful. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado for questions.
Thank you. I thank the chairman. Thank you, Judge, for being here today and for your team. And I certainly have great respect for you and for the ranking member on your subcommittee, whom I know wished that she could be here. And she's spoken glowingly of you in terms of the work that you all have done together in the past. But we have a job to do here, which is ensuring that we review every bill that comes through the Rules Committee before it gets to the floor and that they're appropriately vetted. And so in that regard, I want to just ask a couple of quick questions about the bill that you've submitted to the committee on military construction. I know you agree with me, military construction is an incredibly important priority within this larger bill, right?
Absolutely.
And I read a report recently suggested 30% of our military infrastructure worldwide is in poor condition, which means
Probably correct.
probably correct. So funding military construction, incredibly important to the national security of our country. Last year, when House Democrats were in charge of the House, we allocated, ultimately was signed into law, $19 billion for the military construction piece of this bill. Does that sound about right?
I think you're right, but I'm not positive. I'll take your word for it.
I appreciate it, Judge. And this year, you have allocated $17.7 billion in the
That's
budget
right.
for military construction. Okay, so that's lower. That's a cut of $1.3 billion in military construction that your budget submits. Is that right?
Actually, we're following the, I don't like people sneaking up behind me.
That's all right. You were saying?
Yes, theoretically it is.
Well, I mean, I don't.
Funded more than the president asked for.
I guess I'm trying to understand. You're saying theoretically. Last year, the United States military had $19 billion to spend on military construction. This is for example, housing for our service members. This
right.
year, if your bill passes the House and passes the Senate and is signed into law, there will be $17.7 billion for military construction.
Correct.
So $1.3 billion less for military construction, service members' housing, by way of example, than the last year, right?
Right.
Okay. Military infrastructure backlog. I'm sure you agree with me, Judge, and you've been working on these issues a lot longer than I have. Large backlog for military infrastructure. According to the Department of Defense, about $100 billion. That seem about right?
Wouldn't know the number. It's large.
Okay.
Large.
Well, I can
Large
represent.
need.
I can represent to you. It's a big number.
Well,
President Biden made a request in his budget request that he submitted to Congress for a specific allocation to start addressing that backlog. He asked for $2 billion. How much did your subcommittee allocate for military infrastructure backlog to start chipping away at that? I can tell you, Judge, the answer is zero. There's no money in the budget proposal that you've submitted to us to start chipping away at that infrastructure backlog. President Biden asked for $2 billion. The subcommittee gave him zero.
okay, if you say that.
Okay, so military construction, $1.3 billion cut. Military infrastructure backlog, zeroed out, or zero in the request, or zero rather allocated. The BRAC account, base closure account, I know you're familiar
I'm
with that.
familiar with that very well.
Right, very much so, sir.
Been through two brackets.
Yes, sir, I'm sure.
How many have you been through?
Yeah, yes, sir. One of the accounts in BRAC, as I understand it, is for PFAS remediation and cleanup. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
Last year, House Democrats allocated $200 million in dedicated resources for PFAS cleanup. How much does this budget proposal include for dedicated PFAS cleanup?
There is nothing in this bill that requires or prohibits the government, the departments from addressing PFAS with the funds that they have. The department does not support budgeting by chemical.
Sure. So, and I understand, and I guess what I'm trying to get at, Judge, is there are differences, and I think you'd attest to this. There are differences between the budget you submitted to this committee and that your committee,
I can almost guarantee you.
from the budget that was passed last year, right? I mean, that's the
I
nature of
wouldn't
this. And
argue
so,
with Debbie or you or anybody else.
yes, sir. And all I'm
Our
trying
budget
to,
is more frugal than yours.
all I'm trying to do is glean, I think, for the American people and for members, the differences between the bill that you marked up in your committee and that we're going to consider and the bill that was passed last year. And I think we're in agreement here because you've given honest answers, and I appreciate that. I appreciate
I
your,
always give honest.
yes, sir. I appreciate your candor. Military construction, $1.3 billion cut. Military infrastructure backlog. President requests $2 billion. This budget gives him none. And PFAS remediation, last year, $200 million direct, dedicated funding stream to clean up PFAS at sites across our country. This year, zero.
To clarify one thing.
Yes, sir.
We are 1.5 billion below FY '23.
Yes, I understand. That's what
Right.
as I said.
But we're 800 million above the budget request.
Yeah, but the difference is, and this is my point, and again, this is why we're having this exchange, is the way in which you've allocated dollars are differently. They don't reflect, in my view, the president's priorities, which is why he has indicated that he would veto his deep concerns about this legislation. Again, it's not, you've made a judgment that there ought to be less money for military construction than was allocated last year when congressional Democrats were in charge. That's your prerogative.
No, I didn't make it that, I made a decision to spend it differently.
Sure, well, yeah, spend it differently, sure. So you took,
I'm looking at what's going on.
I hear you.
China,
I hear
and
you.
I'm beefing up the stuff in Hawaii, in Kwajalein, and in Guam.
Sure.
And that's very important.
I don't,
No, those are fighting.
I don't disagree with you about the
Fighting
priorities.
platforms
But, sir, I think this
for our
is,
soldiers.
yeah, of course, and my point is we can do both. The only reason that you're not able to do both is because you have gone deeper than the original spending levels that had been negotiated with the President and Speaker McCarthy 3 months ago as part of the Fiscal Responsibility Act to avert the debt ceiling. So, I mean, we would like to do both, and you're only doing one. And, sir, I guess what I'm saying is you could say it's moving money around to a different priority. That's accurate. I'm just trying to give a sense to our colleagues about where the money is being moved from. And I think we're on the same page that military construction, housing for service members by way of example,
We've done something for them in this bill too.
I understand, but they're getting a cut of $1.3 billion versus what was allocated in the last budget. That's the math. I'm not making these
I've
numbers
actually
up.
be out there and started the fight to get it fixed up.
What was that?
I went out to start that fight on Fort Hood.
Yes, sir. I mean, the best way to do it, I think, would be to fund it at the level that we funded it at. Right? I mean, that's the easiest way to
Well,
solve
you
this
know
problem.
what?
I mean, look, Mr. Judge, the easiest way.
We have a reason we call ourselves Democrats and Republicans.
I hear you. I'm just saying, the easiest way, I'll use PFAS again as an example.
Yes,
because,
I agree.
I mean, PFAS in Colorado, we've got 11 different places where these chemicals have been detected. We want them out of our state. We want that remediation to happen. Not next year, not 10 years from now, now. And the best way to do that, and by the way, there are members on this committee. I'm not the only member who has a military installation or a location within their district or their state where these substances have been detected. Shaw Air Force Base, I believe it. It's in South Carolina. Just recently, you have neighborhoods there who are using bottled water. I was just reading a news article about it, right? This bill does nothing to help them because at the end of the day, the PFAS remediation account, $200 million, dedicated funding that congressional Democrats fought for, has been zeroed out. And all I'm suggesting, Mr. Chair, is, because again, I know you to be an honorable man, and I know that you've worked with your ranking member in the past. And to our ranking member's point, and he articulated this in the beginning, this cannot be the way that I think you and me and others wanted this to end, with a partisan bill, a bill that gets marked out on a completely partisan vote, a bill that is likely to be subject to a, again, completely partisan vote on the House floor, as opposed to something that could be developed in a bipartisan way. That's all I'm suggesting. And you don't have to answer that, but I think my sense is that you concur with me on that assessment. So in any event, we will fight for that $200 million, I should say, for PFAS remediation in the Senate. We'll do it. We'll fight for Shaw Air Force Base and the Colorado bases that are impacted, and every other base of a member on this committee, whether they vote for this bill, or excuse me, whether they vote against this bill, as I certainly intend to do, or not. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back.
Chair, thanks, the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. We are pleased to welcome Mr. Cuellar as the representative of the ranking member of the Milcon VA Subcommittee and the Appropriations Committee. And be happy to recognize you for any thoughts that you may have on your bill.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member McGovern, also and members of the Rules Committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify in place of the Subcommittee Ranking Member Wasserman Schultz, whose flight was delayed on this particular bill, H.R. 4366. I sit as the Ranking Member for Homeland, so if y'all have any questions on Homeland, I'll be happy to answer that at a later time. But traditionally, the Milcom VA bill is one of the few appropriations bills that has had bipartisan support, because generally the bill is written, no matter who's in the majority, with an eye toward a shared goal of supporting our servicemen, veterans, and their families. Unfortunately, this is not the case this year. The Milcom VA is riddled with writers. The VA is a place where veterans should feel welcome, included, and cared for, and all veterans means all veterans. On the Milcom side, the bill cuts funding for service members and their families by $1.5 billion compared to the enacted level compared to current services. In fact, this bill is $200 million lower after the full committee markup than when it was first introduced. Even after the agreement with the President Biden was signed into law, Republicans went back and they decided to cut more. We have a recruitment, we have a retention problems, and Republicans are cutting funds for the military construction. We have a major quality of life issues with our service members, and the majority are cutting funding for military construction. The majority cut dedicated funding for the PFSA remediation and cleanup, which is a cut of $200 million from the current level, and the dedicated funding for military installation for Resilience Project, which is a cut of $90 million from the current levels. This is an enormous need for funds to clean up the PFSA contamination, which the committee previously provided to ensure continued progress in remediating contamination at the closed bases and to minimize the impact for those surrounding communities. Furthermore, neglecting to continue investing to protect our installations from extreme weather is a national security risk. We all know how extremely costly disaster assistance funding is, and the threat it poses to military readiness. Cutting military construction by $1.5 billion slows our historically bipartisan efforts to reduce the infrastructure backlog to strengthen our national security and to improve the quality of life of our service members and their families. We're backtracking on the commitment that we made to our service members and their families. More broadly, veterans rely on programs throughout the federal government. All too often, these investments are neglected in the bills and under the levels that Speaker McCarthy negotiated and passed with a bipartisan majority of both the House and the Senate. For these reasons, we oppose this bill. And I know my good friend Judge Carter and the ranking member Wasserman Schultz and all the appropriations, we understand one thing. This is only the beginning. This is not the end of the process. So there's a process Well, we're going to see this change, so this is only a snapshot of what we're looking at. At the end of the day, we will see something, by that I mean at the end of the year, but at the end of the day, we will see something where we will have a bipartisan approach to this. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Thank you for filling in on short notice. I'm going to go to members who you were not here during the first round of questions. And Mr. McGovern, any questions for the ranking member?
He was so eloquent, I have no questions, or thank you.
I can talk to you about the border if you want to.
Well, that's it.
I do want to talk to you about
But I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And again, the ranking ranking member got delayed, but I know at the end of the day, both Mr. Carter and Ms. Weissman are going to sit down and work this out.
Very well. The gentlelady from Minnesota, any questions for the ranking member?
Thank you.
Back to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania. Now I've forgotten where we were. I think we were at Mr. Norman for the questioning both of our witnesses.
Judge, thank you for coming. Henry, thank you for filling in. Judge, I just want to thank you for introducing your amendment. You know, I think you said it right. You're redirecting money. If you want to talk to the veteran who is having questions about enrolling, re-enlisting, volunteering, it's directly because of the programs, the dollars going to the programs that have been misdirected and ill-spent that you cut out. I can't tell you the number of veterans who have left the military, left their pensions, left their career, because they would not take the government shot. It's completely ludicrous what this administration is doing to our military. They're depleting it. Now, on the issues that, on the individual items that you, in your amendment, the woke, the critical race theory, the what dollar amount would you put on that has been redirected?
I had no dollar amount on that.
No, the cut, by not including it, what are you saving the military of money that's been
Lord, I
redirected?
don't know. What are we saving? Yeah, that's a defense issue. We're not.
It's what?
We don't. That's a defense issue, not MilCon. We're separate from defense. We're under the Defense Department, but we're not attached to STILCOM. That's in the defense bill. What savings go on there?
Okay, all right. Well, whatever dollar amount that you're redirecting, I just want to thank you for doing that. I think the military is sick and tired of not putting money to ships, airplanes, missiles, our protection of the grid, our protection of cybersecurity. And I just want to thank you for doing it and itemizing it, and appreciate your work on it. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New Mexico.
Thank you, Doctor. And before I begin, I'll yield some time to our ranking
Yeah,
member.
I mean, some of these riders, there's no cost to it. I mean, when you say that, you know, when you limit what flags you can fly on a military base, there's no cost to that. So saying that you can't fly a pride flag at a military base doesn't cost anything, but it sends a signal. It sends a signal that there are people in this country that you're willing to target, that you're willing to discriminate against. So a lot of these stuff that we object to has nothing to do with, there's no savings to it. It's just kind of an intentional, mean-spirited attempt to try to isolate a certain group of people in this country. I yield back.
Thank you. And I think this gets to the fact that, and some of the questioning, and thank you so much, Representative Coryat, for coming in. And Representative Coryat, nobody would ever paint you as the most liberal of Democrats, right? You are somebody who really believes in...
I think $20 million spent against me would probably say that.
Right, and yet you are here noting that this bill needs a lot of work because it does not reflect the values that we must hold, which is focusing on our servicemen. Is that correct? Will you be able to vote for this bill in its present form?
No, under this one, absolutely no. Look, this is something that has changed completely. I always look at the the base mark of what we did last year, and it's not where we were last year, where it was a bipartisan bill. So this is only a snapshot to get the bill passed through the House majority. Once we sit down with the Senate and negotiate, the work product that comes back is going to be very different. It'd be something that probably I'll be able to support.
Right, but what we're talking about there then is that, in essence, there had been an agreement to work out appropriation bills so that they would reflect flat funding from last year. And we now are facing bills that do not reflect flat funding, but instead actually have cuts. And these are cuts that are not theoretical. They're not cuts that don't have any impact. They are real cuts that change conditions on the ground. My state is one of the states that has contamination from PFAS. It has contamination from PFAS that's actually threatening the Ogallala aquifer, which serves many, many states. So imagine when PFAS gets into the groundwater to states who are relying on that. In my state, it's ruined a dairy farm. It's threatening many other dairy farms. It's threatening an Air Force base. Would you agree that actually funding PFAS is one of those priorities that is important, not just for the military, but for the surrounding communities?
It's not only important to the military, but all the surrounding communities around it. It's important to their health. Look, there was an agreement that was made, Speaker McCarthy and the President, and they reached an agreement. But somewhere down the line, it was said that, oh, that was only the top line, and we can go below. It's like me going, I'll use Matt Cartwright's example. It's like I'm gonna sell you a house for $500,000. I go to the closing, and at the closing, I give you $250,000, and say, well, hold it. I thought we agreed to $500,000. Yeah, that was only the top. We're gonna go ahead and work it out. And I understand the arguments about debt, but look, in my personal opinion, debt falls to both Democrats, added about $9.2, $9.3 trillion. Then you have President Trump in 4 years added $7.8 trillion in 4 years, almost matching what the prior president did. So in my opinion, it falls on both. And nobody said anything when that debt was being spent on the prior administration. And all of a sudden, a new president comes in and then debt becomes an issue. I saw that in 2010 and 11, and I see it. I think it falls on both sides.
Right, and they don't point out that actually in the first 2 years of the Biden administration and using policies that were passed out of Congress and the House and the Senate, we actually brought the debt down. So if we think about who has been best about addressing debt and deficit, it actually turns out to be Democrat administrations. But I want to talk a little bit about this concept of woke, that there seems to be quite fear of sort of wokeness, and nobody really can actually even define it. But how is PFAS contamination and cleaning up PFAS in any way related to woke? Yes or no? Is it related?
If you're asking me,
Yes.
no, it's not related.
Chairman, Judge, is there any relationship between wokeness and PFAS contamination? Is there any
The
relationship?
difference is that
Right,
it's one chemical.
Yeah.
It's one chemical, but you have to have cleaned up. And the Defense Department doesn't want to do a one chemical cleanup.
Yeah.
They want multiple chemical cleanup.
Right.
And that's the difference.
Right, so that's about the need to have cleanup so that we are actually, when we know, I'm not saying that there was an intent to contaminate, but in places like New Mexico, the military has contaminated, and I think it's only fair and right and reflects the appropriate values to say we made a mistake, we will clean up that mistake. And I would say about the same thing, the cuts to military construction, those have nothing to do with some worry about wokeness, right? I mean, the cuts to construction are simply cuts to construction. And those impact not just military readiness, but Representative Cuellar, that's an impact on the local economy, correct? Because we're no longer building what is needed on those sites.
It has a good question. It has an impact, Congresswoman, not only the service men and women, but also their families. But also it adds, we know, military spending like San Antonio. Military spending is so important. I was just at Randolph Air Force Base talking about construction just yesterday. And so it has an impact on the local economy. And look, we know there's a backlog. No ifs, no buts. And it's either you pay now or you're going to be paying much, much at a later time. So I'd rather pay now.
Right, and Judge, would you agree that when, I know in anybody's home, if you don't do the repairs right away, it ends up costing more later? Is that kind of been your experience
And
with it?
anybody in the building business,
You're right.
if you don't finish the project, it gets more expensive.
It does get more
I
expensive, so
won't
by,
argue with that.
right. Thank,
However, we have given our military construction budget is much more than the VA budget. It's lower, but it's much more targeted fighting the war than is usual.
but we go back to the point that was made earlier by my colleague, that it is indeed a cut, and it's a cut from what, in a sense, we thought there would be agreement on because of both what came out of with the debt deal, and which passed out of this House on a bipartisan basis, and what's needed. The last point I want to talk about is just veterans. And it's my understanding that initially, the bill with regards to funding for veterans was lower, and that there was an outcry about that, and funding now is what it is. Is that correct, Representative Correa?
That's correct.
So, but, you know, when I think of service, we tell our veterans over and over again, thank you for your service. And in my mind, those words ring hollow if we are not providing veterans with the services that we have promised, but not just promised, they earned those services. And so some of those services are through the VA, but so many other of those services are through HUD, through some of the programs, the ag bill, which we'll be taking up later, you know, the nutrition programs. Those services that veterans have been promised come through many different agencies. Is that correct, Representative Correa?
Absolutely.
Would you agree with that as well, Judge?
I would.
Yeah, and so I think when we look at these bills, we're going to need to look at them and say, are we continuing to honor our veterans by providing them the services in each of the areas that we fund as we look at those? And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Very much. Gentleman from New York is recognized for any questions you may have for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our nation's veterans deserve the best that we can give them when it comes to care and resources at the VA. And I think all of us in this room can agree with that principle. Now, unfortunately, time and again, the VA has fallen far short of this principle and left our veterans who have given so much to the security and to the safety of our country with long delays in substandard service and neglect. Most recently, our veterans and their loved ones have been subjected to the enormous problems that have resulted from the VA's implementation of a modernized electronic health record system. Patient safety issues with this new system have been so dire that they've even resulted in several deaths. This is just a failure, and it's something that we need to fix, and the VA should be ashamed of how it has let those men and women down that fought for and served this country. Judge Carter, what does this appropriations bill do to fix the VA's electronic health record system implementation?
Fund the people that say they can do it. Now, this has been my issue since 2004. That's a long time. And one of the things I keep asking people is, where's the money we've already given you? And nobody's gotten this thing done. And that's something we ought to ask. Right now, we started the program. We looked like they were going in the right direction. And then we're not capable of finishing. They got bought up by another company, and we renegotiated the contract with this other company, and they said they could get it done in a year. We're going to be checking on them monthly. That's where they are. Because it's ridiculous. You know, from 2004 to today, it's 20 years.
It's a long time.
And, or almost 20 years. So the real issue is what's going on. And why can't they do it? And I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. And that's a bipartisan issue, believe me. And it has been since day one. Both sides are mad about that issue.
Good. Well, thank you. In addition to the implementation of the electronic record system, is there anything further that you would like to highlight or reiterate that this bill does to move or to bring significant improvements in the VA?
I'd like to clear up a little bit of stuff. We provide 106, I can't read these big numbers. $161 billion, $720 million, I guess it is, of mandatory funding, and we also provide $20.268 billion for the toxic exposure fund, which is equal to the FY20 budget request of $182 billion and $1.3 13.5 billion above the FY23 enacted. So we certainly did not short that particular issue that we're discussing. It's just when they're going to do it with what chemicals.
Very good. Thank you so much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Would the gentleman yield?
Oh, of
me
course.
For a question?
Absolutely.
I had a question, Mr. Cuellar.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to ask, I think it's, to answer your question, because I think we're in a bipartisan agreement that we got to do something about the way the VA works. Cutting it, I don't think is exactly the way to do it, but I think what we ought to do is we got to do our jobs and provide legislative oversight, and I'm talking about real legislative oversight. Number two, there's ways that we can put language to make sure that we have spend plans and other ways to get the job done. But I think one of the most important things is to have the real, what I call real legislative oversight, where we do our, I'm talking about all of us, our job, and implement what's in the law, but it doesn't apply to the, it's something I changed the law back in 2010, the modernization dealing with performance-based budgeting. We have it up there, but Congress hasn't applied it. I think if we did that, we would know that if we spend $1, we know what's the bang for the $1. And we look at the measures and the performance and the inputs and the outputs. And I think those two things would be legislative oversight and some sort of performance-based budgeting on that.
If you'll continue to yield for an additional question, just on the PFAS issue, and we've dealt with that a lot in the Authorizing Committee of Energy and Commerce. And one of the difficulties is, number one, there's a number of compounds that fall into that category. And then one of the other difficulties is the EPA has not yet finalized the rule, and they've not yet reached a designation. Does there need to be a CERCLA designation around some of the PFAS chemicals? So this is not a problem that is not being addressed in this appropriations bill, but it is a bigger and tougher problem, not one that we don't need to solve. We do, but right now, one of the difficulties in solving it in the Milcon VA appropriations bill is that the APA has not finalized. They need to provide us the information on what exactly we're trying to contain. Otherwise, it becomes just a free-for-all as far as spending, and no amount of money that you spend can get you the result that you want if you don't know where you're trying to go before you start out to get there. So thank you, Mr. Langworthy. I appreciate you yielding.
Would the gentleman yield?
Thank you very much, and I want to thank both our witnesses, particularly my two friends from Texas, but my friend, Mr. Cuellar, who came on very short notice because of an
And I thank you
unfortunate
for coming.
travel delay. So thank you very much for coming.
Well, I got mine.
Both you gentlemen are excused.
Well, the other thing is that we don't need this EPA
Okay?
but they've done a whole bunch in that area. It's like ridiculous. Oops.
I'd like to welcome our second panel, Chairman Westerman. I'm advised that Ranking Member Hall is on the way. Okay. Well, I'll wait till I shut the door. As I said, I'm advised that Mr. Hall will be here shortly, so we will go ahead and begin, if we may, Mr. Chairman, with you. Thank you again for coming. Oh, well, here he comes now, so. Again, I'd like to welcome our second panel, Chairman Bruce Westerman, Ranking Member Paul Rahava, from the Committee on Natural Resources. Chairman Westerman, welcome back to the Rules Committee, and I would welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Cole and Ranking Member McGovern and members of the committee. I'm here today to speak in favor of SJ Res 9 and SJ Res 24. These are two bipartisan Congressional Review Act resolutions that passed the Senate that we've had hearings and markups on in committee, so they've been through regular order in the House. And these CRAs would reverse the Endangered Species Act regulatory overreaches by the Biden administration. SJ Res 9 addresses the listing of the lesser prairie chicken under the Endangered Species Act. The lesser prairie chicken is actually the poster child for success of voluntary conservation. And although the lesser prairie chicken has long been known to be a boom and bust species, a decade ago, state governments, energy producers, and private landowners came together to voluntarily invest their own resources towards creating a healthy lesser prairie chicken population. Those efforts led to the creation of a range-wide voluntary conservation plan. At least $65 million of private investment has gone into species conservation, and nearly 6 million acres of habitat has been conserved for the benefit of the lesser prairie chicken. And when you look at the amount of work that they've done, $65 million doesn't seem like that much money, but I think it shows how much better the private sector can stretch their conservation dollars than what the federal government often does. These investments have resulted in populations growing from less than 20,000 birds in 2013 to over 35,000 birds in 2020. Clearly, the plan has been successful, yet the Biden administration's listing of the species ignores everything I just highlighted. SJ Res 24 addresses the uplisting of the northern long-eared bat from a threatened to an endangered species under the Endangered Species Act. The bat's main threat is not human activity. It is a disease known as white nose syndrome. This is freely admitted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, yet they have chosen to pursue a preservationist approach to recovering the species. Uplisting the long-eared bat will wreak havoc on the 37 states that make up its habitat and do little to save the species. It will also have a negative impact on other species because it will be used to stop beneficial management on public lands, and it will disincentivize conservation on private land. You'll be interested to know that 9 of the 13 members of the Rules Committee represent states that are the habitat for the northern long-eared bat. And ironically, most of the high-profile endangered species issues come from out west, but this is one that's more of an eastern and middle of the country issue and has spared our colleagues in the west and in Texas. Actions by the Biden administration to uplist the bat to an endangered species will again increase the bureaucratic red tape for critical infrastructure projects and forest management, and in some cases it'll grind those activities to a halt across the bat's 37-state range. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has already identified over 3,000 projects that will require additional permits for operations to continue. To date, 6 of the 37 states in the bat's range have developed habitat conservation plans to benefit the bat, while providing reasonable assurances to stakeholders that forest management and infrastructure projects can continue. These plans should continue to be developed and implemented, but if the service's uplisting remains in place, unfortunately they won't. Now, I want to be clear, this resolution does not remove the bat from the endangered species list. Instead, it returns the species to its present or previous status as threatened. With that, I thank the committee, and I'm ready to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Ranking Member Hallwell, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Cole, Ranking Member McGovern, and members of the committee. Today's resolutions that could be the last items that go to the House floor before members return to their districts for the next 6 weeks. They could be those resolutions. Undoubtedly, when we go back, our constituents will have questions about what Congress has done this year to address the real issues that Americans are facing, and rightfully so. There will be many issues that come up, but as we find ourselves in one of the most unforgivable hot summers in our recorded history, I am certain that many will want to know, one, what are we doing to slow down climate change? And two, what are we doing to help communities that are already hurting from the impacts of climate change? Right now, the heat waves across the country, like the 25 consecutive 110-plus degree days in my home state of Arizona, are causing suffering and even death. Workers won't have adequate protections for heat exposure. Power grids are folding under the pressure. Local businesses can't operate as usual. Unfathomably warm waters off the coast of Florida are threatening to bleach corals, kill marine life, and upend the state's tourism economy. And that's just one part of the climate change equation. Our constituents will also wonder what we're doing to protect them from stronger hurricanes, more intense wildfires, and wildfire smoke, flooding, storm surges, drought, and all the other extreme weather events that are confronting, that we see in the news every day and we experience in our lives. These are big questions, and I'm sure the American people are expecting big answers. But as it stands now, it seems that as if my colleagues across the aisle are satisfied with telling them that one thing they've decided was the most important was to pass before we left for 6 weeks was this bizarre vendetta against the endangered northern long-eared bat and the lesser prairie chicken. Not only are these measures not what the American people asked for, they are going nowhere. The White House has already signaled that they will veto these resolutions. This is a pointless political exercise and stunt. But of course, it's one that will keep Republicans' industry friends happy. And judging by everything else we've seen this year, that seems to be the GOP's priority number one. In the Natural Resources Committee, we have had hearings after hearing, bill after bill, most notably Republicans' H.R. 1, the Polluters Over People Act, that does the bidding of the fossil fuel and mining industry and is a blueprint for everything else that is followed on that committee and on energy and commerce as well. Sometimes it's a giveaway of our public lands and oceans. Sometimes it's climate science denial. Sometimes it's a free pass for polluters to leave a mess and not clean it up. But perhaps more often it's a thinly veiled attempt to gut our most fundamental environmental laws, namely the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and the Endangered Species Act, much like we're seeing today. These attacks on our environmental protections are a shameless gift to the industry, a gift at any time, but doing it while we watch the greatest environmental crisis of our time hurt and even kill Americans all over the country, it's unforgivable. The American people, and yes, the bats and chickens deserve better than these bills. We're opposed, and we yield back.
Thank you very much. The chair has no questions at this time, so the chair would recognize my good friend, distinguished vice chair of the committee, Dr. Burgess, for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a philosophical point on the Congressional Review Act. Yeah, it's one of those things that people don't pay a lot of attention to. But I will tell you, as just a working guy back in the I guess it was early 2001, I was pulling into my driveway one night in Highland Village, Texas, not in Congress, never expecting to run for Congress. And on NPR, they said that Congress had passed a Congressional Review Act which alleviated some of the difficulties people are going to have complying with the congressional law that had been previously passed that dealt with repetitive use injuries. I mean, I was looking at having to replace all types of office equipment in my medical practice, not for better patient care, not even because anyone who worked in the office had had a problem with carpal tunnel syndrome, but someone in Congress had decided that this was a good thing that we could do. You know, it's just one of those things where you'll always remember where you were when you heard the news. This was the first, and for a long time, was the only Congressional Review Act that passed, but it was one effort at helping a long-suffering public who had to deal with one thing after another that was coming their way from the United States Congress. Now, Congressional Review Act did see a lot of activity in 2017. Congressional Review Act is difficult when you don't control both branches of the legislative branch or both houses of the legislative branch, when you don't control the White House. But still, it is a signal to the long-suffering public that Congress does hear you when you complain about things. And I think it's worthy of our time and our attention and our debate. I've got no problem in justifying that throughout the month of August, throughout the rest of the year, however long it takes. Let me just ask you a question, Mr. Westerman. One of the number one thing we hear about from our constituents is inflation. Will either of these Congressional Review Acts make inflation worse?
Theoretically, they would, because they will put the brakes on the economy in certain areas across the country. And, you know, should we pass this out of the House, it would be an act of Congress. Congress in both the House and the Senate in a bipartisan manner would have passed this Congressional Review Act, which I think would be stating the will of the people. Now, if the president chooses to continue with his rulemaking through his agencies, then I guess that's his business. But I think this is an opportunity for the people to speak and say enough is enough. And at the end of the day, this is going to do more harm to long-eared bats and other species, because it'll stop management of the forest that actually creates the habitat for these long-eared bats. Plus, we'll see increased forest fires and other bad results because of an activist position that's pushed the Fish and Wildlife to uplist the long-eared bat and the prairie chicken.
Well, thank you for your work on this. I do think it's important, and I do think it's worthy of our time and attention of the Rules Committee today. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Ranking members recognized for any questions he may have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to associate myself with the remarks of the ranking member. You know, with all that's at stake and with all that we need to do, that this is what we're focused on right now. I mean, we don't have any appropriations bills at all that have passed the House yet. Maybe we get one or two this week. Democrats were criticized because we had 6 done. We went to August recess, and you may at most have 1 or 2 or maybe none. And I don't know whether this is intentional or what the game plan is, but we're inching closer and closer to a government shutdown, which is going to hurt a lot of people in this country. And so I would urge my Republican friends to go back to the room and figure out how to actually move some of the stuff that needs to get done. You know, talking about this stuff at this point, to me, is not worth the time. And I appreciate both the gentlemen for being here. But I mean, we have some urgent things that need to get done. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for any questions she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do, Chairman Westerman, I did want to talk a little bit about the importance of this, and maybe you can share with us, what does this really mean from the practical standpoint for a farmer in my district? And the importance of having things like, you know, when a species is listed as endangered or upgraded from threatened to endangered, it makes significant issues for those farmers.
Yeah, well, thank you, Representative Fishbach. And, you know, for those who would want to downplay the importance of this, I would say go talk to the farmers in your district. Ask them, you know, how much extra burden do they need to be able to do the work on their land. It may be something from getting an additional permit, which can be a lot harder when you're dealing with the federal government, or it may be shutting down your activity totally. And also, if my colleagues want to minimize the importance of this CRA, the only reason we're doing this is because the Biden administration made a silly rule. They didn't follow the science. They followed their environmental activist friends, And they made a rule, and it's our duties as members of Congress to be the voice for the American people. So I don't think it's trivial at all that we would take this up. I think it has very strong impacts across the country and could hurt businesses and hurt the environment all at the same time. So when silly people make silly rules, and we have to have silly meetings to reverse their silly rules.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, because it really does affect the farmers. It really and you mentioned a permit. Don't know how long that's going to take, and could hold you up for months and months, potentially years. But I appreciate the effort for the long-eared bat, and the range includes Minnesota. But I do want to just highlight a little bit a long-standing issue for my state as well, and for many states, but the gray wolf. And my time in the legislature, we were dealing with that, and the species has long been confirmed as recovered, but it remains listed under the ESA. And can you talk about the ease in which it is to list a species compared to the difficulty of graduating a species off the list?
I call the endangered species list Hotel California, because species go on and they never leave. And the gray wolf is a great example. The Biden administration, Fish and Wildlife Service said they're recovered. They're still listed as endangered. It undermines the whole intent of the Endangered Species Act, and it's why on the committee we're looking at doing a reauthorization on the ESA, because it hasn't been touched in about 50 years, and it's been weaponized and it's being used against people who work for a living in our country. It's going after the thing that allows them to do their job, and it's hurting the environment at the same time. So it's important that we take these issues head on, that we make it something that's really about recovering endangered species. When it was first put in place, it had some success stories. The bald eagle, the grizzly bear, I don't think anybody doubts that, and I don't think many people think we should do away with it. But it should be something that works for species, not against species.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think it's disappointing when issues like this that are important to the people in rural areas and who are trying to make a living, they're trying to farm, they're trying to raise cattle, whatever the case may be, it's lessened somehow that this is not as an important issue that we should be addressing. So I appreciate your information on that. And with that, I yield back.
The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for any questions you may have for the panel.
Thank you very much. I do find this disturbing. The northern long-eared bat is native to Pennsylvania as well as Minnesota. And we have seen this decline of almost 100%, 97 to 100% across the country, and they are a vital part of our environment. I find myself a little conflicted about this because I can deal with snakes and I can deal with rodents. I cannot deal with bats personally. I mean, that's just a visceral thing. But I do have to argue for them here. Mr. Grijalva, can you tell us why there is this push to try to undo regulations that have been years in the making, have already been subject to court cases, et cetera? Why is this push to undo the science for a critter which is clearly threatened?
The point is that industry now has the upper hand in species listing and not science. It's not a negative impact on the timber industry. It's not a per se negative impact on agriculture per se, the listing of the bat. And despite the issue of extinction, the issue to need to protect habitat, I find it interesting in many of the examples of why these resolutions have to be enacted. It's not a question of silliness, but it's a question almost of exaggeration and anecdotal information. Science is the driver. And to take that out of science's hands, I think for all of Congress and for the agencies involved, takes a valuable tool. The CRAs are dangerous because it puts science, habitat, biodiversity in a second place and deals with anecdotal industry demands and doesn't deal with how ESA has functioned, That's why 99% of the species listed continue to exist and have not become extinct. And so it serves a purpose. And the issue to reduce habitat, take habitat out of the equation in species survival are all efforts, I think, to undo the act itself, even though we're celebrating 50 years of success as we speak.
So it sounds like it's another effort to inject political judgment, which, as you note, can be swayed by industry as opposed to science concerns in this.
If the debate was entirely empirical and based on science, it would be a good debate.
Okay.
But when you're dealing with what ifs, and I heard, and so, it happened to so, and the empirical part of the discussion is not there, that's when it is a clear attack on the Endangered Species Act, and these CRAs represent that.
Well, I share the ranking member's concern that we're spending time on trying to undo the science when there's been so much effort poured into it, and as well as his suggestion that farmers will be a great deal more harmed if we are unable to get the appropriations bills, which are due, to be considered because we're spending time on industry-driven attempts to undo scientific judgment. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for any questions he has for the panel.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate both of you coming to testify. You know, if anybody say this isn't important, they're out of reality. They hadn't been in the real world. You know, we've had projects in South Carolina. Development is what we do. I've had D6 caterpillars sitting on the sidelines waiting on I think it was a sandhill snail they were trying to find. How stupid it's like this long-eared bat. I mean, really? To hold up the progress for road building because of this? I see the bald eagle. That makes sense. I see the bears. That makes sense. But long-eared bats, I hope the white nose syndrome wipes all of them out. We won't have it to worry about. And the snail in South Carolina that we faced, I think it was a sandhill snail. It cost the state a lot of money. Think of the tax revenue. So it's laughable, and you got these bureaucrats making I actually don't think, well, Biden wouldn't know whether he really passed it or not, but it makes no sense, these bureaucrats he wouldn't know they wouldn't know a bat from a worm, really. They're just not in the real world. So this is very important. It's sad we have to deal with this and pass legislation to stop some insanity like this. And it would be laughable if it wasn't so serious. But we've been victims of it. People all over the country have with permitting. Imagine trying to find snails, going out digging for stupid snails. It makes no sense. Just like the prohibition that's getting ready to happen on, I understand, water heaters. What they tried to do with gas stoves, this administration. It's completely insane what they're trying to do. So thank you for bringing this up. Thank you for pioneering this. And I wish my friends on the other side of the aisle, particularly as it relates to climate change, the forest fires that they say is caused by acts of God. No, it's the thatch that's building up. It's the trees they won't allow to be thinned. Talk to the foresters. They have no idea they won't go to the experts that really know what they're talking about, other than these cowboy behind a computer making rules that are costing the American people. Thank you for what you're doing. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
I think the gentleman, my friend from South Carolina, covered a lot of ground, so I'm just trying to keep track. I'm glad to hear that he believes the bald eagle should be protected, and bears as well. Apparently he has very spirited views on which animals should be protected and which should not. I'm reading from a U.S. Fish and Wildlife report that was issued last year that says, and quote, with respect to these bats, that they eat enough pests to save more than $1 billion per year in crop damage and decline, as well as pesticides costs. So, I think the American people can rest assured that my friend from South Carolina isn't in charge of making the decisions as to what animals are endangered or not. That is a judgment reserved by virtue of the Endangered Species Act to the experts who look at these matters in an objective, independent way, free of any political interference, soliciting, of course, input through the rulemaking process from industry, from a wide range of stakeholders, and then rendering a judgment that they believe is in the best interest of the country and of protecting that species. So, look, I have to just step back again and underscore the point that the ranking member made earlier about the priorities of this committee and of the Congress under Republican control. And I have great respect for my chairman on the Natural Resources Committee, and it's a privilege to serve with him on that committee, and of course, my ranking member, the former chair. So I take it he'll construe my questions with that preface. But maybe you could kind of illuminate the committee, Mr. Chairman. When does government funding run
out? The government funding, we all know, goes through the September the 30th when the fiscal year takes place, and
Correct.
I don't know what that has to do with the northern long-eared bat.
Well, I'm going to
That's
get
a
to
prairie
it.
chicken, but
Well, it does. It has a direct connection. So September 30th, right? Government shuts down if the Congress doesn't fund it. That's 67 days from now. Does that sound about right? Right?
sounds right.
All right. We've got a couple of days left here in session this week before the congressional recess begins. Right?
Starts next week.
Starts next week. Starts this Friday, right?
Yep.
Congressional recess this year, under the schedule Republicans released, is 45 days. So 45 days of those 67 days before government shuts down, we're not here in Washington. Do you know how many appropriation bills we've passed in the House under Republican control?
You talking about out of committee or off the House floor?
I'm talking about out of the House floor.
I believe there's a couple possibly scheduled for this
Possibly.
week. But I'm with you. We should be passing appropriation bills.
I agree.
That's the reason we come to Congress, and I have full faith that eventually we will get the appropriation bills passed.
Well, I think heavy emphasis on possibly, as you said, because I don't, we're taking up two bills, one bill today, one bill tomorrow. We'll see if those get a vote on the floor.
We did get a provision where we cut the funding by 1% if those bills don't get passed. So we know that's lurking in the shadows as well.
Well, you asked a question, Mr. Chairman, and so I'll answer it about what connection does this have to the lower prairie chicken and what's the second animal that we're dealing with?
Northern long-eared bat.
Long-eared bat, yeah, okay. So 67 days until the government shuts down, no appropriation bills passed out of the House of Representatives under Republican control, a few days left in the House, in session, before we go on a 45-day recess, and we're here debating reversing rules issued by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service over the lower prairie chicken and the long-eared bat.
Lesser prairie chicken.
I'm just saying, Mr. Chairman, and that's the choice that Republicans make with respect to the priorities they want to pursue on the House floor. That's their prerogative. You have the majority, you have the gavels, but I can assure, I know you would know this, I can assure the American public that we would certainly have different priorities if we had the gavels, and we would not be careening towards a government shutdown, as unfortunately it seems, as the House is. Now, you didn't say this, but one of your colleagues here on the Rules Committee did. I found it fascinating. He made the argument, and maybe he'll return to the committee, that he connected the two CRAs that we're taking up today. I think these were his words, that this sort of connection to inflation, that he hears a lot about inflation at Mr. Burgess's return. So I don't want to quote him out of context, but the notion that somehow these CRAs connect to House Republicans' efforts to lower inflation, I just think the American people are going to have a tough time understanding that argument. And here's why, right? Because we could consider bills to lower insulin costs, to eliminate junk fees, to lower health insurance costs, to enact a child tax credit, all of these policies, by the way, that congressional Democrats pursued for the better part of 2 years that would make a real difference in terms of lowering costs or growing the middle class. If you and if my colleagues want to convey to the American public that their solution to inflation, which, by the way, is lowest, or rather the most significant decline point in the last 2 years was last week. But in any event, if the solution to inflation is reversing the protection on the long-eared bat, I'm not sure that's an argument that's going to work, but that's not my.
Maybe I can.
Of course, Mr. Chairman.
Maybe I can help explain that to you, and also why it takes more time when you're actually trying to be fiscally responsible and pass appropriation bills that are show that we're good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, rather than just passing a lot of spending like drunken sailors and passing huge mandatory spending bills. That's pretty easy. But when you get in and start looking at what's important and start prioritizing that becomes more difficult. And I think that's where my friends across the aisle miss the point on how these little things actually are big things, and they add up. And when you put more regulations and burdens on the people who are growing the food, who are producing the lumber to build the houses, who are doing the blue-collar jobs across this country, when you put more regulations on them and it causes them not to be able to do their job, they're already facing high labor rates. They're facing issues with people not coming back to work because my friends across the aisle passed so many programs that weren't COVID-related, that used COVID as a red herring to get these
Do you have any
spending bills put
empirical
in
data,
place.
Mr. Chairman, to point to?
Yeah, the Inflation Reduction
No,
Act,
I'm not
which
talking
was
about that. I'm
mislabeled.
talking about with respect to the listing that you mentioned.
Yeah,
Because
so-
I pulled the rulemaking, and I didn't see any
Let
empirical
me tell you
data
how
that was-
this actually works. I'll tell you from my district.
Sure.
And this is, and I reject the notion that Republicans don't care about the northern long-eared bat or the lesser prairie chicken, and the quote science. I don't know who these scientists are.
Mr. Chairman, and I want to interrupt you, but literally one of your colleagues just said if it was up to him, he would eliminate the bat from the world. So I don't know that, I hear you and your point, but that just happened right now. So
But if you truly
you can clarify
care
me
about-
if you said that the bat you hope they were wiped out. Did I mishear that?
No. Thank you for yielding. Of
course.
Geese, I didn't say eliminated from the world. I said.
What did you?
I said the disease, the white nose disease.
Yes.
Yeah, I have no problem with them wiping that long-eared bat out. at
Okay.
all. As long as. and
That's
I
an
hope-
important, I
hope-
appreciate the clarification.
I
So-
hate it'll wipe the snails out as well.
Hey,
Some
no,
of
I
these
hear
other-
you. I'm just saying, your chairman here is saying, well, I don't know who these Republicans are who want this fungus to wipe out all bats of this
that's
particular
not what
variety. You're looking at your colleague here is the one who said it. So
I said I
go ahead.
reject the notion that the science is making this decision, because the problem with
You
the
said you
northern
reject the
long-eared
notion
bat
the Republicans don't want to
is the
protect
white
that
nose
bat.
syndrome, which the Fish and Wildlife Service has acknowledged that, yet they're not proposing any solutions to correct the white nose syndrome. And when you attack the habitat of the species you're supposedly trying to protect, you're not only hurting that species, you're hurting other species. And in my district, I've got the Ouachita National Forest, where they do a great job of protecting habitat for the red cockaded woodpecker, and they do that by management. You know what? The workers on the Forest Service there told me, they said if this bat gets listed, all of our efforts will be focused on counting bats, and we won't be able to work on the habitat for the red cockaded woodpecker, which happens to be the same kind of habitat that the northern long-eared bat likes. So if the Fish and Wildlife goal was to really help the bat, they would be going out and saying, we've got to manage to create habitat where the bat can thrive, not stop all activity and put an abnormal, unscientific caused burden on people who are working in the field. And that's what this rule will result in, and it
Mr.
will
Chairman,
hurt the bat and hurt the
I hear
economy.
you, and I've I wanted to give you ample, again, in recognition of you as the chair, ample opportunity to be able to make your case. And I understand that you have an opposition, ideological opposition, or you would say on the merits with respect to the rule that was promulgated by the Fish and Wildlife Service. All I'm suggesting is that in 67 days, if House Republicans shut down the government, which they seem determined to do, the American public is rightfully going to ask why they spent such valuable floor time on the long-eared bat and the lower prairie chicken and every other CRA, ESA that you all have pursued in the last 8 months. And I think that they would be reasonable to ask the question as to why the House Republicans are pursuing the priorities they are. But again, I recognize we have a difference of opinion on this. I have to give my ranking member an opportunity to jump in here and welcome his thoughts on this front.
Actually, the resolution 24 on the bat, it eliminates efforts to address white nose syndrome, the fungus that is wiping out and has caused it to be listed as threatened and needing the remediation that the law provides. And the protections that are necessary now is while wildlife scientists work to address the underlying causes of this syndrome and the devastation it's causing to the bat. That is what ESA does. Let me talk a little bit about collaboration, if I may. In my home county, back home in Arizona, Pima County, the pygmy owl was identified as a threatened and endangered species about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. The reaction of the community was to set up a collaborative effort with Fish and Wildlife, National Park Service, local communities, and begin a joint examination of what to do. What resulted in that was new urban planning, managing the growth of the area, protecting ranch and agricultural areas, and in the process, the economy of that region did not suffer. Transportation projects continued. And what happened is that we had a conservation plan and a biodiversity habitat protection plan. And the pygmy owl revitalized. It's back to being threatened again. But all the efforts that went into that have been part of restoring what was a species that was on not only the decline, but at the point of disappearance. Those private collaborative efforts are threatened by these resolutions. It takes the public content and the ability to participate and to have joint agreements and to supplement and provide incentives to communities to do exactly what needs to be done around that. And there is, in my mind, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, the continued use of cherry-picked information, anecdotal information as the basis for these CRAs, I think is a most offensive thing to anybody that would like to see this debate occur based on empirical information and science. I go back to that because that's the basis of ESA and the antithesis of what we see with these two CRAs.
Yeah, and I agree with the ranking member, and my friend Mr. Rosendale was whispering to me to make sure it caught not lesser, lower prairie chicken. I do think the collaboration point is an important one. I think that's a salient point, and that certainly is the case in Colorado. Our governor has submitted a letter, which I'll enter into the record later today, talking about the collaboration efforts and why, in his view, this joint resolution misses the mark. My understanding, at least with respect to, again, the CRA regarding the lesser prairie chicken, is that there are a variety of activities. I see Mr. Rosendale smiling. A number of activities that ultimately are permitted under the rule. I mean, Mr. Chairman, maybe you can clarify this for me. My understanding was under Rule 4D, grazing is allowed. Am I incorrect in that assumption?
Under Rule 4D, I believe you are correct.
Correct. And I also understand cultivated crops is permissible under Rule 4D.
But once the chicken or the bat is listed, what you will see where there's been voluntary conservation efforts on private land, those dollars will be pulled back and that management won't take place.
I understand that's your view.
And then it's going to, on public lands, like I said, in the forest where I live, the efforts of the employees are going to be focused on managing a bat that they've never seen, but they know that it's migrated through the area.
And I recognize that's your view of what you think may happen. I guess I would just simply restate for the record, the rule enables a wide variety of activities the Fish and Wildlife Service believes can happen and ultimately simultaneously happen or occur, development, any number of other areas. And so, I'm not going to belabor the point. I did not want to get into an extended debate about the lesser prairie chicken or the long-eared bat, and would far prefer that we debate a variety of issues that I think the American people care deeply about: lowering costs, growing the middle class, building safer communities. So I will, hope springs eternal that perhaps at the next Rules Committee meeting that we have in 45 days after the recess, that we might be able to take up some issues that I think the American people will be very interested in hearing us take up. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Gentleman from Texas is recognized for any questions he might have for the panel.
Thank the chairman. Mr. Westerman, I appreciate you being here along with the ranking member. In the previous Congress, this point, had the Congress run by the Democrat majority passed any individual appropriations bills?
6.
Any individual standalone appropriations bills, Mr. Westerman?
Not that I'm aware of. They waited and passed a massive omnibus bill that had,
So on July,
kinds of
I don't know, I
ornaments.
think 22nd or something like that, they passed a minibus with 6 appropriations bills and a minibus in July, which of course went nowhere. And in fact, there was an omnibus passed in December that, to the best of my understanding, was an increase of spending of roughly 10% for defense and 7% for non-defense, $1.7 trillion bill, including a massive package for Ukraine, correct? So in other words, this wailing and gnashing of teeth of what bills have been passed or not passed here in July, the previous House, led by Democrats, had done no such thing, had passed no individual bills. And in fact, we have Milcon, it was a 6-bus.
Mr. Roy.
It was a six
gentleman
bill
yield?
minibus.
Yeah, a minibus that included 6 individual bills.
Right. Passed it, the minibus, which then went nowhere and was a part of an omnibus package in December later in the
But
year.
how many have the Republicans passed?
Well, we'll
Gentlemen,
cross that bridge when we get there.
Gentleman from Texas controls the time, but I would
And so-
also ask that you not talk over one another. It's very difficult for the stenographer. Thank you very much. Gentleman's recognized.
So, Mr. Westerman, with respect to Milcon VA, that is currently on the agenda for this week, correct?
as far as I know, and you would know better here at the Rules Committee, and
Right.
Ag Appropriations, I believe, as well, possibly.
That's right. And how much is our current national debt? About $3 trillion? $33.5 trillion?
Heading that way with a 1.4 or 1.6 trillion deficit in the last Congress.
That's right. How much have we added to the national debt since the debt ceiling deal that was struck Memorial Day weekend? Over $1 trillion since Memorial Day weekend. Does that sound about right?
Sounds right.
So would you not agree then, with respect to the questions being asked about which appropriation bills have been passed or not, that it is important for the United States House of Representatives to be trying to find a way to stop the burgeoning debt crisis that we've seen imploding on the American people over the last, in time memoriam?
I would agree to that, too.
Another question with respect to power around the world and electricity. Would the gentleman agree, because I know one of the issues, I'm going to get to this with respect to the Congressional Review Act, that upwards of just shy of 1 billion people throughout the world lack electricity? Upwards of 3.5 billion people lack reliable electricity. Does that sound about right to you based on your experience?
It does, and there's an insatiable appetite for it, and we're seeing an exponential growth rate in the consumption of energy from all forms, including coal, oil, and gas.
Correct. And with respect to the strength of this country, are we not one of the largest exporters, if not restricted by regulation and interference from the government? Are we not one of the largest exporters of liquefied natural gas?
We are, and we could be the world's dominant exporter of liquefied natural gas, which would do more to reduce carbon and address the climate than anything else we've talked about in Congress.
And do more to improve the lives of human beings around the world, particularly the 3.5 billion people who lack reliable energy, correct?
Correct.
And of the competing sources of power, is it not true that, for example, of solar panels, 80% plus of solar panels parts, from sort of begin and end, are produced by China or Chinese companies. Does that sound about right to you?
I thought it was a little higher than that, but it sounds about right.
Yeah, it might be a little higher than that. You might be right. Is it also not true that of the 10 biggest wind turbine manufacturers and companies involved in wind production, 7 of the 10 largest are Chinese-based companies? Does that sound right to you?
That sounds correct. Plus, they control the elements and minerals that go into them.
Correct. Is it in our national security interest to turn over the production of power to the Chinese?
It wouldn't, according to my ideas, and I'm assuming the way you see the world as well.
Is it in the interest of the world to have reliable energy that we rely on the Chinese to be able to produce that power as opposed to having the United States be able to export liquefied natural gas, among other resources?
I would go with America every time on that one.
And kind of final point on that, is it helpful or harmful to production of liquefied natural gas, petroleum, oil, and other products that we produce in this country for the, I don't know, roughly 80% of the world's energy supplies that still come from fossil fuels? Is it helpful or harmful to have regulations like the Congressional Review Act legislation before us is targeting this week?
It's helpful to be able to push back on these radical rules that are not really about helping the species. I have different views than Mr. Norman on the bat. I think bats are good because they eat bugs and provide a good service to mankind. But the administration's rules are not going to help the bat, and they're certainly not going to help our energy dominance and help the world to be a cleaner, safer, and stronger place. And what it will do is play into the hands of, as you mentioned, the Chinese Communist Party. But also you look at Russia and OPEC and the others who produce oil and gas to fill in the demands that we're not meeting because we're not producing it here, which that's bad for the world as well.
Ranking Member Grijalva, I'm correct that you co-sponsored and support legislation to ban fracking. Is that correct?
Yep.
Chairman Westerman, do you think it is a good idea to ban fracking?
If you don't want to see America dominant in oil and gas production, then that's a great way to go about stopping it. But I personally don't think it's good science or good policy to ban fracking.
Is it a coincidence, Chairman Westerman, that the 5 states covered by President Biden's action with respect to the lesser prairie chicken, Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Colorado, account for about 60% of the U.S. crude oil production? Is that a coincidence?
I don't think it's just coincidental that these species that are located and are co-located with where we do a lot of energy production are the ones that get targeted the most by this administration.
Thank you. I yield back to the chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman is recognized.
On the question, I said yes, but the explanation is this to the gentleman. The legislation I supported dealing with fracking was about full disclosure. What is being injected, communities need to know. The consequences of fracking and not knowing what chemicals, what substances are being used as part of that process because it's considered proprietary, because of it's a private industry. The issue was about full disclosure so that communities can have the right to know and have the right to ask for mitigation and consultation on those issues. That was it, and it continues to be it. And that continues to be, on the fracking issue, a particular spot in which many communities feel that they don't know what is being pumped into the ground around their communities, well, how it's affecting aquifers, how it's affecting other, the stability of land itself, and the right to know, and requiring private companies to disclose, I think is a fair ask.
Well, then just quickly reclaiming my time, I would just note that the bill in question is called the Fracking Ban Act. But my point really is that it is imperative for our national security and for the well-being of the American people and the well-being of people around the world that we have energy for human flourishing. And the ability for us to produce gas, produce liquefied natural gas, export it around the world is better for our national security and better for people around the world and for human flourishing, including gas that is produced by fracking. I would also note There's significant research continuing to mount about the negative consequences, the negative impacts of the use of solar panels, the negative impacts of the use of wind turbines. I say that as Texas, which has significant numbers of both. But we should be producing energy how the market demands. And I believe that this Congressional Review Act is important for ensuring that we can continue to do that, and I'd yield back.
Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for any questions she may have for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for coming before us. You know, I think it is a national imperative, an imperative for the world, that we do indeed increase our ability to be energy independent in the United States. And what the Inflation Reduction Act was exactly that. Not only did it allow us to use incentives so that we could have more private investment in energy, it also is making sure that we are bringing that manufacturing back home. And to anybody who wants to make sure that we are manufacturing in America, they should be supporting the Inflation Act rather than seeking to gut it like our Republicans are trying to do. You know, if you're for energy production in the United States, let's be for actually building the solar panels here, actually building the windmills here, actually getting that into the pipeline, or as it were, the electric line. Mr. Chairman, I really do appreciate the fact that you talk about the importance of collaboration, and I think that that is key. In New Mexico, I really appreciate it when the different people on the ground can work together to address the many challenges we face. So thank you for highlighting that. But I do agree with Ranking Member Grijalva's point, as well as my colleagues, as to what should we be doing in this moment now. And right now, we seem to be spending a lot of time battling these culture wars about wokeism rather than saying, what should we be doing for our veterans? They want to throw in whole kitchen sinks of culture wars and out of our education committee rather than actually dealing with anything to improve scores in reading or math. Every bill that has come out of the education committee has been about attacking somebody else, attacking a group of people, attacking lesbians, banning books, et cetera, et cetera. But on this one, it's almost like they want us to not pay attention to what's important. So if we were dealing with the lesser prairie chicken, you know, it's like Chicken Little, right? Claiming the sky is falling. Let's pay attention to these issues, which are so important, like banning books, rather than the issues that Americans want us to listen to, which is how do we grow the middle class? How do we reduce prescription drug prices? How do we make sure that we manufacture here in America what we need in America? And thank you, Ranking Member Grijalva, for your points with regards to that. Do you want to add anything more to this discussion?
No, in deference to my friend, the chairman, and the respect I have for both him and Mr. McGovern, I resisted entirely all the little analogies I had about chickens and stuff relative to this whole conversation, and you're tempting me, but no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
I know, it's just like, oh my God, the chicken. And the fact that each of these species actually does play a role, and when you say let's wipe them out, I don't know what that means, because we know that so many of the beautiful creatures that God has created and that walk and crawl and fly among us play an important role in our ecosystem. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, of thinking about the beautifulness of the nature that we have and our need to protect it, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Before I move to the gentleman from New York, I just want to thank my good friend, the ranking member, for his restraint. With that, gentleman from New York is recognized for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Westerman, are either of the species we're discussing today at risk of extinction, let alone under severe threat from human activity?
I don't believe they're under threat of extinction, but I believe, and we know that the lesser prairie chicken, the numbers have improved from 20,000 to 35,000 in less than a decade because of voluntary conservation efforts. So they're moving in the right direction. So it's strange that you would go from threatened to endangered when you're moving in the right direction, other than the fact that Mr. Roy brought out that these prairie chickens are located where a lot of oil and gas is produced, and they can be used to obviously throw a wet blanket on that. The northern long-eared bat, we do know that the white-nosed syndrome is causing a lot of death with the bats, and also restrained from using any kind of analogy with substances found at the White House and the white-nose syndrome with northern long-eared bats. But we know that what the bat needs is good habitat to be able to succeed. And we need to find something to address the fungal issue of white-nose syndrome. And just making a rule at Fish and Wildlife saying, oh, these bats are endangered now, we're going to protect them more, that doesn't protect them more. That's just words on paper. The actual efforts take place out in the field when you do management and when you really do research to figure out how to combat the white-nose syndrome, which is what's killing the bats.
So thanks to the long-eared bats designation under the Endangered Species Act, approximately how many projects have been required or will require regulatory reviews and permits?
I've heard the number 3,000 already just in, I believe that's the Forest Service alone. And that just multiplies across the country, because if you're a private developer and you go in, as Mr. Norman talked about, if they just think it's habitat, not if they find one of these, but if they think that the habitat could support one, then you're going to have to go through all the bureaucratic red tape and hurdles to be able to do your project.
And these are infrastructure projects often critical to rural areas and communities, correct?
They're very critical. They're critical to the whole country, and I think people don't realize how cumbersome the overregulation can be, especially when it's been weaponized and used by people just to stop progress and stop development.
So, let's just cut through the hysteria. When conservation works, then let's acknowledge that it's worked and adjust these protective designations accordingly. But above all, let's just think about the impact that every stringent designation, every new regulation, and every new review requirement has on the lives of Americans living in rural areas who often bear the brunt of these burdens. I'd like to say thank you once again to the Natural Resources Committee for bringing these resolutions before us today, and I appreciate the continued efforts to put the brakes on the Biden administration's regulatory regime, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I want to thank both the chairman and the ranking member for joining us today, and thank you for your thoughtful comments. Both of you are excused. I would now like to invite up to the table Mr. Rosendale, Mr. Zinke, Ms. Green, and Mr. Mast.
You're up first. Was that the order, Mr. Chairman? Was Rosendale first?
Yes. We'll have all of you up here.
All right.
A little bit of luck, nobody shows up, you'll be our last panel. So if we can, we'll begin to my left and your right with the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. Green, then we'll just move right down. You're recognized, Ms. Green, for any testimony you care to offer on any amendment.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee for hearing me talk about these amendments today. I'd like to talk about amendment number 33 for the Milcon VA Appropriations Act. My amendment cuts the $73 million increase in funding for the NATO Security Investment Program. The United States overwhelmingly contributes more than our fair share to NATO for Europe's defense, and it's time European countries pay their due. While our own border is overrun by border crossers and deadly fentanyl, with 300 Americans being murdered daily, we continue to send hundreds of billions of dollars to NATO to defend Ukraine's democracy, even though they aren't a NATO member nation. Investing in NATO security is an America Last policy. President Trump was exactly right when he called on European nations to put the required minimum of 2% of their GDP toward NATO defense spending. Most NATO countries still don't meet that requirement, and the U.S. ends up paying for 70% of the alliance's defense. This is outrageous. I would also like to point out here, yeah, they pay 70%, but the rest of the European countries and our NATO allies are paying very little with the NATO Security Investment Program. The second amendment I would like to talk about is Amendment number 98, would strike the funding for the Office of Resolution Management, Diversity, and Inclusion. I'm having a hard time understanding why our Republican bill here, appropriations bill, has funding for an Office of Resolution of Management, Diversity, and Inclusion in the first place. The Office of Resolution Management, Diversity, and Inclusion in the VA is charged with promoting woke DEI initiatives. My amendment would strike over $86 million of funding for this woke office, which provides trainings for VA employees to teach them about their implicit bias, among other things. Instead of spending millions of taxpayer dollars on identity politics and ideology, we should put that money towards making the VA an agency that actually helps our veterans and our heroes who served our military and desperately need good health care. I know the veterans in my district would appreciate $86 million to help them, not to pay attention to identity politics. Sick and injured veterans don't care if the VA employee serving them has checked their white privilege or anything else of that matter. They just want to get the treatment they need. And I would like to remind the committee how many veterans commit suicide, especially waiting treatment in the VA. There's something important to talk about here. With the Office of Resolution Management, Diversity, and Inclusion, they offer instructor-led and virtual instructor-led training, applying cultural competence in a multicultural VA, combating incivility in the workplace, diversity tension in the workplace, managing gender diversity, managing implicit bias, valuing workforce diversity and workplace inclusion, practicing effective diversity and inclusion in the workplace for managers, understanding micro behaviors in the VA work environment. Employee mandatory training includes diversity, equity, and inclusion training for executives, managers, and supervisors. This is filled within the Department of Veteran Affairs with the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Access Action Plan that you can read about. But there's also involvement here with ACORN that talks about people's implicit bias categories, which is a person's unconscious attitudes about other communities. Again, this is the VA where we're supposed to be taking care of our veterans. I know we all believe in America being an equal place for all Americans. We shouldn't have to treat people different based on gender, sexuality, identity, race, whatever it may be. We acknowledge that all Americans are equal. We acknowledge that everyone has equal rights, as it says so in our Constitution and our civil rights. So there's no need to spend $86 million for this inclusion, diversity, and equity in the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Rosendale, you're recognized for any amendments you care to speak to.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I thank the committee for allowing us to come in and present our amendments to you today. I submitted 4 amendments for the fiscal year 24 Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and Related Agencies Appropriations Act. However, I would just like to focus on 2 in particular. My first amendment, number 14, would prohibit the use of funds made available by this act from being used to enforce any COVID-19 mask mandates. I didn't think that we were going to have to discuss this in this meeting, but unfortunately, there are still Veterans Administration's facilities that are mandating masks be used. Our country sends our young men and women overseas for long periods of time, away from their family and friends, at great risk to their physical safety. When they come home and become veterans, the VA doesn't always provide them with the care they deserve, and that is unacceptable, just because someone was walking in not wearing a mask. I've heard from numerous veterans in my district that have been denied care over their unwillingness to wear masks, to supposedly provide protection for a pandemic that has long since been declared over, and a method that was declared ineffective. Denying a veteran medical care over a personal decision is outrageous. We owe it to care for our nation's heroes to provide them with the best possible care, not stigmatize them over masking decisions. The VA did loosen its COVID-19 masking requirements recently, but they left too much discretion to unelected bureaucrats to make those decisions about how it will actually be implemented. The pandemic has long been over, and it's time to end all the COVID-19 mandates. My second amendment, number 15, will reduce funding for the Veterans Electronic Health Records subaccount by $5 million and increases the funding for the grants for construction of state extended care facilities by $5 million. This would be a wise investment, especially considering that we were able to claw back roughly $400 million from the failed Oracle EHR program. The increase in funds for the grants for construction of state extended care facilities would allow for more funds to go towards state extended care facilities, like the Southwest Montana Veterans Home. This is a perfect example of where community, state, federal, and private individuals work together to build a facility to care for our veterans. The land on that site was actually gifted from a family. If the Southwest Montana Veterans Home were to receive $5 million, they would be able to build their sixth cottage. That sixth cottage would allow 12 additional veterans to receive care. That is a big deal in Montana. It's a bigger deal in Southwest Montana, and there's a lot of other folks around the country that could take advantage of these same types of programs. There is currently a wait list of over 35 people, showing that there is a great need for the additional cottage. Each cottage is designed to be very home-like for these veterans, with private bedrooms, a bathroom, central kitchen, dining, living rooms. Investing in the cottages to serve more veterans is a prime example of what a successful use of federal money actually does look like. Instead of doling out money to Oracle Cerner, we should use these resources to provide world-class treatments to our veterans. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. I was remiss not to note we had the entire Montana delegation here, so, and I'd be remiss not to again thank my friend, Mr. Zinke, for his hospitality when I had the good fortune to visit your extraordinarily beautiful district earlier this month. So with that, my friend's recognized to speak to any amendments he cares to address.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I rise to speak on an important issue, the Zinke Amendment 49, which really stops a very, very bad rule. And if not stopped, it'll gut air ambulance services across Montana and rural states. And believe me, if this rule is not stopped, it's going to mean people are going to die and veterans are going to lose their lives. Let me explain a little about Montana. Chairman's been out there, I invite all members too, but Montana's the same size as from here to Chicago plus 2 miles. Montana's population is just a little over 1 million. And just in Bozeman, I met with the CEO of the hospital there, and she reminded me that not every hospital even have the same services. So in distances across Montana, when you're 2 hours away from the hospital, and maybe you do hit that deer, maybe even hit a bison, but that's going to mean that you're going to, if someone comes along and if they have cell phone coverage, you're hours away. Your only life-saving is air ambulance and services. That's just not Montana, it's across the West. And in places that are more desolate, like Indian Territory, your chances of getting to a hospital in time are remote without the services. So this amendment, obviously supported by the veterans groups of VFW, American Legion. But let me give you a little background of why we're here. So in February, the VA finalized a rule that reduces the reimbursement rate, and it goes back to a 1998 reimbursement schedule. 1998. What were you doing in 1998? I was in Bosnia. That was a few years ago. So they did this rule without contacting stakeholders or industry leaders. And so what does this rule do? It would reduce reimbursement rate by 80%. There isn't an air ambulance service that can operate with that type of reduction. So also remember, we had the secretary of the VA here in the committee, and he was asked about this very point. And he said he would work with us. He said the solution was contracts, that the VA would go forward and they would contract the air services and recognize you can't reduce by 80%. So what happened? Nothing. I led a letter of 10 members to question why. And what happened? Nothing. Crickets. Previous letters all reached the same conclusion. Nothing happened. It seems like some cases the only time people listen is when the power of the purse is applied. So recently, last week, we found that the industry, through the industry sources, that 911 calls are no longer reimbursed by any contract vehicles. They all would go down to reimbursable rates in 1998. And considering that most calls are 911, this is a big deal. Not to mention that we have to transport patients between hospitals because not every hospital has emergency services. Not every hospital has across the spectrum care. So the effects of this rule are this, that if we don't stop implementation of the rule here, it will go in effect. We will eliminate most of the air ambulance services across Montana. You'll close bases, especially in Indian Territory. So CBO. So we went through, of course, we want to follow the rules and go by CBO. So what's the problem? The problem is this. The rule is not in effect yet. It's in February. They have technical difficulties applying CBO because the law, the PACT Act, hasn't determined whether or not this is discretionary, non-discretionary, and which fund. And the HHS has not upgraded the schedule for ambulance services as they said they would do. And in law, they were by law, they were to do, but they haven't. So you have a schedule that hasn't been redone. You have a PACT Act that hasn't been determined, and we can't get a CBO score. But this is what we've all promised in this committee. We promised that we would keep the VA whole. Remember that. VA, we looked at it, the deal, we'd look at defense, and we keep VA whole. This doesn't involve additional spending. This involves a continued spending as it was until we get a solution which is probably contracted air and force the VA to do what they're supposed to do. So with that, this is an important issue across Montana. I'm sure my colleague from the east side recognizes that, but it's just not Montana, it's across the west. So with that, I ask your favorable approval to right this wrong on a very important issue in Montana. And with that, I'll yield the questions, sir.
Thank you very much. Gentleman from Florida is recognized for any amendments he cares to address.
Chairman, thank you for recognizing me. I've massed amendment number 12. I would say thank you to the ranking member. He's not with us right now. Doctor, hope you're doing well. I'm coming before you today with an issue also for veterans, and it's related to veterans' cannabis use. I am not a doctor of any kind, not an MD, a pharmacist, a psychologist. I am a veteran. I woke up in a hospital at one point on a laundry list of, let's say, 20-plus drugs, from an epidural to oral morphines, Oxycontins, sleep sedatives, antidepressants, anti-inflammatories. And the moment that I was aware of what I was on, I worked on weaning myself off every single bit of that, and within a matter of about 6 months, I was clear of everything that doctors had put me on while I was not even aware of it, when I was still incapacitated. Not all of my veteran brothers and sisters have had that same experience with their care and with the pharmaceuticals and the narcotics that they've been on. And while I cannot speak as a doctor, I can speak as somebody that's witnessed my Ranger brothers, my Green Beret friends, my SEAL friends, pilot friends in the military that have had similar experiences of injury or of varying kinds, woke up with similar dosages of painkillers and narcotics and other things, not been able to get off the drugs that they were on, seen their families destroyed, their work destroyed, other parts of their life absolutely destroyed, and they're in a situation within our VA hospitals where their doctors are not able to really have honest discussions with them about the medication of cannabis use, whether that's a good choice for them, a bad choice for them, whether it's paperwork that they should be filling out and helping them gain access or not gain access to because of the laws within their state's programs. And I think that that's something that should change, that we should address by making sure that funds are not enforcing a law within the Department of Veterans Affairs that prohibits an individual's doctor within their state where they have legal cannabis laws from having those discussions with their veterans. And if those discussions yield that cannabis use is wise for that veteran, for whatever the reason is, helping them, assisting them with the paperwork and everything else that would be needed, as they would with any other prescription that they would be helping their patients with. That is the nature of my amendment, and to address that specifically, which is the VA policy stating that VHA providers are prohibited from completing forms or registering veterans for participation in a state-approved marijuana program. And in that, Chairman, I thank you for hearing me out, and as well as the rest of the members of the committee, and I yield to any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. The Chair's grateful for all of your testimony. I have no questions. I yield to my good friend, Dr. Burgess, for any questions he may have.
Again, grateful for your testimony. No additional questions.
The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for any questions she may have.
Yeah, I just had to look at the VA's, let me pull it up here, the VA's office that the gentlelady from Georgia is trying to zero out. I mean, this is, we've made some progress in recent years on addressing issues of harassment and discrimination in the military and in the VA. And this would eliminate the agency that tracks and resolves complaints of sexual or racial or religious discrimination or harassment, everything ranging from, you know, assaults and unwanted touching to publication of pornographic images. So I think this is, you know, a gross overreach. And obviously another part of the culture wars. So I would just have to strongly oppose that amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for any questions.
Just thank you all for being here. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for any questions.
Thank all of you for coming. Congressman Zinke, what's the price tag that you're talking about to get the funding back in Montana?
Great question. And again, we couldn't get a CBO score. The best we can analyze it is that they're spending about $200 million across the board on ambulance services between air and ground.
Per year?
Per year. But again, this is no cost savings, because the issue is, and the reason why the CBO had the problem, one is that the PACT Act, they looked at it, and it needs a lot of work on what's discretionary, what's non-discretionary, remember that one? And then the HHS has not updated the ambulance rates since 1998. And then the VA said they would do a contract, so when the CBO score was looked at, they were unable to determine real savings because the rule's not implemented yet. So we couldn't get a CBO score, and that's part of the problem. And I would look at this is that it's being conducted now. The solution is to do what the VA promised they would do, to enter into contracts so they could take distances and platforms and all those things in consideration, rather than doing an old form that just doesn't work. So I would love to say this is a CBO score. We've been working with them, and they're unable to give us a score. So then you go back to what was the original deal is to keep VA whole, and look at where we want to make sure emergency services in the VA are critical, and this is one of them. And that's the best I can do.
Yeah, I can't
sir.
imagine that was ever cut. I really can't, for any state, Montana or anything else, any other state.
Well, and it's just not Montana, it's across the Oregon. This is bipartisan, so it has bipartisan group because it affects all veterans. But also, when you're looking at platforms, when Montana has so few people and most of the recipients are on Medicare, Medicaid, Indian Health Service, this applies, the air service applies to everybody. You got to get them there, and all of a sudden 9/11 calls are not allowed. What is allowed? This is a big problem.
Congressman Mass, if I understood your testimony, you're wanting treatment for, to get off the drugs veterans are under. Did I understand that right?
My friend, what I would say, in my experience, a number of my veteran friends have utilized cannabis as an alternative form of medication very successfully and without the same detriment to their families, and it's really allowed them to go back and flourish within society. I wouldn't pretend to say which veterans it's good for, which veterans it's bad for their health, for their psyche, for anything. I could absolutely point to individual cases of friends that have, as I said, flourished, but the system right now as it stands in states that have cannabis programs, doctors within the VA are not allowed to, per the policy, stating that VHA providers are prohibited from completing forms or registering veterans for participation in state-approved marijuana programs. They are not allowed to have essentially honest conversations with their patients about whether it even is or is not a good option with their patients.
That's amazing. That's not allowed. I mean, it really is. Very few people know that, I think.
I find that as well.
Thank you for bringing it up.
And, Mr. Chairman, for the record, you asked a question about savings. The VA estimates, if they go non-contract, they'll save about $40 million a year. Is what the total program is about 200. They say by implementing this rule, their savings would be $40 million. But also that savings wasn't represented in the president's budget. So the president, the VA budget that was sent to us, it was whole. So this is a rule that even affects the president's budget.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentleman from Texas, recognized for any questions he has for the panel.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of quick questions. Ms. Green, do I have it correct that a report that I have from the Secretary General's report that it was only 7 of the 30 NATO member countries, and if you said this in your opening statements, I apologize. I just want to make sure the record's clear, that only 7 of the 30 NATO member countries met the 2% GDP defense spending obligation in 2022. Does that sound correct to you?
Yes, that does sound correct.
And, the point here, we've got additional funding in here for NATO, and your amendment seeks to strike that or reduce that. I can't remember. You can clarify, but, and, the point being, why are we continuing to throw dollars at NATO when they don't uphold their end of the bargain?
Right, they're not upholding their end of their bargain. The defense expenditures of NATO countries in 2023, the United States alone is at $860 billion. The second country, Germany, is at $68 billion. United Kingdom is at $68 billion, and it just goes down from there. So they're not paying their fair share. The United States is paying for the defense of Europe and the NATO allies.
I assume the gentlelady is as troubled as I was at the vote last week in the United States Senate, and only 16 members of the Senate voted for a bill that was put forward by Senator Rand Paul, just simply saying that if Article 5 under NATO is triggered, that we should follow the Constitution of the United States with respect to United States congressional involvement in terms of our engagement with troops, and that we should follow our Constitution. And the reason I bring that up in this case is, isn't this part of the entire problem that we're facing with continued subsidy of NATO without respect to any of their upholding their end of the bargain, and then we're expected, apparently by even members of this body, to ignore our own constitutional obligations with respect to what may occur in NATO.
I completely agree with you. Everyone I talk to in my district at home and Americans I talk to across the country want our defense of our borders to be the #1 priority of the United States Congress, the Department of Defense, and our federal government, not countries that most people can't find on a map.
I thank you, Ms. Green. Mr. Zinke, has the VA evaluated how many air ambulance bases may close after its change in air ambulance reimbursements that you just described?
Well, and thank you for the question. It's funny, when the VA put the rule in, what they didn't talk to was the air ambulances. So we think that most of the air, when we're talking about 80% cut in costs, we think that most air ambulances services will no longer exist.
All right, and the point of your amendment really is just to maintain the status quo in spending, right? It's just relative to this rule change that's creating the problem, correct?
Yes, that is correct. And also, the power of the purse. When Congress has the secretary before us, and we ask him a direct question, and he says, well, he'll work with us, and he agrees with it, and then subsequently ignores us, and then puts in a rule that does great harm without talking to stakeholders or the states, we have a problem. And you're right, it is keeping the same spending. We're not asking for any more money. It's just keeping the spending that was there, and then working together to make sure we have a fix. And I think we agree with the fix. It's a contracted rate, long-term, stable platform over time that takes everything into consideration.
Has the VA measured the budget effects of the future increases in long-term care that may be required after air ambulance bases close because of what that's going to mean with respect to veterans, increased mortality, the reality of what that might mean for their care, et cetera? Have they done any kind of study on that? I'm not aware of one, but I'm just asking.
I am not studied, but I have talked to the CEO of Bozeman this over the weekend, and she reminded me that Montana and rural states, we don't have single centers of excellence across the board in medical care. If you have a heart attack, there's hospitals that may be a few hours away. If your emergency treatment, pediatrics is a problem. But we have to move people around, and the first thing is you go to a treatment center, trauma center, to stabilize, and then you may have to move immediately for other care. Without the ambulance service moving, what happens is, one, you don't get the care, and two, it builds on problems, and at the end of the day, you spend more money.
Right.
And the lethality of treatment becomes much less, obviously more.
And it's not just a Montana problem, to be clear, right? This is a nationwide problem, particularly a Western states problem.
Yeah, in rural areas,
Yep.
and from Oregon down to California, and the air ambulance system, which I can give you information on it. But in Texas,
Well, we have an
sure
impact
too.
on Texas too.
Yes, sir.
So what last point on that though? You brought up the burn pits, right, and the PACT Act. I assume what I'm hearing you say, without getting into that whole conversation though, but it's important, is that this is one of those things that's a consequence of what was done by creating through the PACT Act, a rather significant amount of mandatory spending, and then the now impact we're seeing with respect to the flexibility to deal with discretionary spending is getting impacted. And this is one of the things on the chopping block for those of us that were, and everybody in this body, every single person, Democrat or Republican, wanted to deal with burn pits and still do effectively. But this is one of those consequences, right, for having gone down that road through the mandatory spending approach.
Oh, well, yes, and I'm a huge advocate of Article 1, Section 9, that nothing should be removed from the Treasury unless by consequence of appropriations. So I think this whole mandated continuing resolution discretionary thing, it takes Congress away from what we should do. Our main task is the power of the purse. So yes, I think this is an unintended consequence of that.
Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I don't disagree with the gentleladies from Georgia's figures at all, but as an unabashed Anglophile, Britain is one of the countries well above 2%, and they did deploy considerable forces to our assistance in Iraq and Afghanistan. But I agree with the gist of your comments in terms of so many countries not doing what they ought to be doing. I just want to note for the record, Great Britain is not one of those countries. With that, are there any other questions for the panel? I thank you very much for your testimony and your patience for waiting here this long to testify. Is there anyone else seeking to testify on H.R. 4366, S.J. Res. 9, or S.J. Res. 24, Seeing none, this closes the hearing portion.